Hello, I'm David.
And I'm Bill.
And we're bringing you another episode. This episode will be about a recent poll that we did regarding collective bargaining.
It's important to know that we reach out to our members and wanted to see how they felt about collective bargaining. And collective bargaining is an important topic that we're going to be talking about coming up in this upcoming session. So we wanted to hear back from our membership.
And not just how the membership feels in general about collective bargaining, but more specifically, we picked a couple of core topics that related to the provisions of the proposed bill under this past General Assembly, and asked some questions related to that as well.
Right.
So we'll get into those.
Well, and it's a big topic, so it's going to take some time to explain how that bill worked, and that's the reason for the questions, the 21 questions on the survey, is to see how many people understood all the working parts of collective bargaining in that bill. It was amazing to see the response. We actually got a great response back from that survey.
Yeah, 13%.
13%. And people may say, well, 13%, that's not a lot. But if you're a House member, if you've ever run for election and you're a House member or a Senate member, you represented 82,000 people. As a House member, you represented close to 280,000 people as a Senate member. And you're lucky to get 600 people likely voters.
Which would be about how much of a percentage of the
about
voters?
4%.
Yeah.
So we're triple the number.
Yeah, certainly.
So that drives our margin of error down.
Yes.
Tremendously.
Yeah.
If you were to get 13% response from a poll that was done asking constituents what's the top issues or how they feel about a candidate, and you got 13%, then your margin of error is minute. So you really have a very good poll sample at that.
Yeah, I thought it was an excellent amount of folks that took the time to do the poll. It took some time too.
It took some time. We gave it a week, over a week actually, and most polls in a elected race, they go for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But they have to get respondents back, and it was not a pressure poll. It wasn't a push poll. It was let you decide, let you answer the questions. Sure. And that's a more accurate feeling of how the
how do you
masses
feel? What do you understand?
Right.
Your position, essentially.
Right. So we basically took our knowledge of what it was like to do polls in elected races. We just came out of a presidential race with polls being taken all the time. And we tried to narrow it down to a accurate number of how they were thinking as far as the body as a whole.
Certainly. So let's get into a few of the poll results. We'll start with 65.2. That was the number of folks that responded in the poll that said that they did not support collective bargaining as a general proposition.
Which is an important number.
Yes.
2/3, over 2/3 of the membership. But that also doesn't reflect how many of the 1/3 that just was uncertain.
Yeah, and that number was about 15%.
Right.
So that they had not yet decided.
So it was only a few percentage points that were in support.
Yeah, just about the same share said that they did not support it. Or they did support collective bargaining.
Right. And collective bargaining as they knew it, as far as unionization of the membership, 65.2% have said they don't support it at all.
Yep. And then I asked more specifically whether or not you supported Senate Bill 917, which was the Senate bill in this most previous General Assembly session.
Vetoed by the governor.
Yes, Senator Surville out of Fairfax. I asked if the folks supported that bill,
right,
and also House Bill 2764 on the House side.
Right. And, that number, of course, being against it was 65.9%. And even at that number, I don't think everyone knew exactly what all was in there other than it was collective bargaining.
Yeah, and as we get through a few of these statistics here on the poll,
it'll show.
It does show. It very much shows that some of the really core parts of the collective bargaining proposal, the folks didn't know it. They didn't know about them.
Right. And when you're studying polls, you try to figure out, how people are receiving information, how many people have really looked at the issue of whatever the issue that you're polling. Mm-hmm. And it's reassuring that 65% knew what collective bargaining did and how it affected their job. And one of the main points for us was, we police the police. And so you're going to put us in the same union as the other police that we're having to investigate, or agencies that we have to investigate. The sheriffs are not going to investigate their own people. We have to go in and do it.
Certainly.
It's obvious that our members understand that because they're involved in it every day.
Mm-hmm. And it shows in some of the answers, again,
right,
as far as the poll is concerned. And I will say, just as a quick side, that I meant to mention that I'm going to do a 3-part series, or we're going to do a 3-part series. Right. This first part is in regards to the poll, and then we're going to take and we're going to extrapolate all those core parts of the proposal from the last session, explain those to the membership, and then we're also going to do a pro and con with respect to collective bargaining in the public sector.
Right.
A full explanation of some of the things that you just mentioned, like the fact that if we're all in the same union and we police the police, is there a conflict of interest? A general inherent conflict of interest in public sector collective bargaining, those kinds of topics.
Well, and it's obvious that the General Assembly knows that there is issues with collective bargaining, and I say that because something that wasn't in the survey is that their aides and the Capitol Police that they control mm-hmm. are not a part of it. They are exempt from that bill.
Yeah, so and I will jump ahead. That was one of the questions. I asked in the poll whether or not folks were aware that Capitol Police and the sheriffs would not be included in collective bargaining.
Right.
And they're part of a group, a large group of folks that are excluded from collective bargaining under the proposal from this last session.
So it begs the question: is do General Assembly members expect a constitutional officer such as the sheriff to come in and investigate another agency? Because
it's probably unlikely that it's going to happen.
It's not going to happen, and you're going to have so many biased investigations if you do this because of the nature
because of the political ramifications.
Right.
Let's move on to the next one. Again, a really important question. I asked if they were active or retired.
Right.
59.6% said that they were active. 59.6%, a large majority.
Yeah,
of the folks.
You're at 2/3 of the people that we're talking to are the active members out here working on the road, and that leaves another 40% that are retired. But we also have to be reminded that some of our retirees go back to work for the agency.
Yes, many of them do work for the agency.
Many of them, to fill these gaps of the shortfall that we see.
And we shouldn't discount that they spent decades in the state police. I think they've got a good handle on what's best for the agency, especially with their tenured experience and sometimes continued experience with the agency.
And it's not like they've not been faced with the topic of unionization. I mean, they also have dealt with this over the years. So they have a knowledge, having come through the agency in the many years that they've worked there, and the wisdom of understanding what their jobs entailed, and why collective bargaining wouldn't be good for the agency. And a lot of them, like myself, spent time out in the coal fields or shipyard strikes, and trying to have an unbiased opinion and do your job when there's a negotiation of a contract going on and people are trying to get to work in a right to work state, and the unions are forcing them or trying to prevent them from getting to work. So myself and a lot of the other retirees have dealt with that, where a lot of the younger generation from 1989 forward has never had to deal with that. And
Right.
so if you've never dealt with that, it's a very stressful, very complicated issue that you're dealing with when you're in those positions. And you have to be completely unbiased about how you feel about a union.
Certainly.
So that these people can work in a right to work state.
Exactly, Bill. And one other thing that I'd like to point out, and again, we'll elaborate on this as we go through this three-part series, but some of the answers are also reflective of the fact that members have a general understanding of the landscape of,
Right.
of public sector collective bargaining. There's a lot of information out there. We'll go into specifics about that. I will point out one agency in one of the questions that related to a poll question. But there is important information out there to understand about what public sector collective bargaining in police agencies looks like in the United States.
Well, to be clear, we're not. I mean, if the private sector wants to unionize, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. The problem is using public dollars, using my tax dollars to collectively bargain with.
Sure.
And
we touched on a question on that.
Yeah,
too.
the transparency of all that is very complicated.
And it's super important. And then of the active, the 59.6% active, we asked them to break that down further. We asked them if they were supervisor or non-supervisor.
Right.
And 67.9 of those percent of those respondents said that they were non-supervisors.
Which goes back to, again, the 2/3. And that's what is now starting to build to help you understand,
Yes.
The accuracy of your poll. So, each time that you're getting a 2/3,
it's quite consistent.
It's quite consistent. So it does reflect what the overall membership is feeling. And just to touch on one other thing on the the 60% that were active and the 40% that were retired, to give you an idea of how accurate this survey was, that is actually within 1% of what our membership is.
Yeah.
So
It's
really
fascinating.
it is fascinating. So our numbers are undisputable as far as that. Any pollster would take those and
Certainly.
say, look, you have one of the most accurate polls.
Yeah, and deem it to be valid.
Right.
We asked the folks whether or not they thought that statewide law enforcement should all be in the same collective bargaining group or unit. And 73.5% of those folks said no. The state police should not be all in the same group with other state level law enforcement agencies.
And this is where your numbers start to grow, because this is where most people that have heard collective bargaining are thinking about unionization and bargaining for just you. And then when they start seeing that it's involving all law enforcement in one pool getting the same amount of money share, those numbers start skyrocketing, because that's where they had, I guess, a misunderstanding of where this legislation was going, because it was grouping all law enforcement together.
Certainly. Which leads us into the next question, which is I asked folks whether or not they believe that all statewide law enforcement should be paid the same amount.
Right.
And this is an important consideration, because in terms of collective bargaining, there's going to be arguments that they should all be paid the same doing a statewide law enforcement job. And 84% of the folks that responded said that they did not support that.
Well, and that's a huge number, and I'll tell you why. Because they know that they're going to have to investigate those people who are making the same pay as they are, but yet not doing the same job.
And not just that, most importantly, there are a lot of statewide law enforcement agencies that make a lot less than the state police.
Right.
So,
and it's a big number to try to bring them into consistency of what we make.
Yeah, it's going to cost a bunch of money. We also asked folks whether or not that collective bargaining process, the process of making the agreement and collective bargaining, whether or not it should be subject to FOIA, or whether or not it should be transparent, and folks should be able to see what's going on. We asked this question most importantly because the proposed bill, said that was all secret until the contract's made.
Right.
85.4% said that it should be subject to FOIA and should be open and transparent.
Well, most everyone who works with the Department of State Police understands the importance of transparency and how that money can be hidden very easily, and corruption can
backdoor deals,
corruption can take place if nothing is transparent.
Sure.
That's why audits are done. That's why investigators look into backgrounds and so forth, is because everything has to be open, as far as, how you're dealing with other people's money. I mean, the state doesn't produce money. The money that they get comes from the pockets of the taxpayers.
Yeah, taxes.
And so the public and everyone should be aware of how they're spending this money. But yet under this legislation, there is no transparency.
No, not at all.
And the worst part is they're not subject to any laws that.
Sure. No, there's no constraints.
There's no constraints.
And we'll get to one question about, how the folks understood the scope of collective bargaining. We'll get to that in just a moment.
Yeah.
On the taxes issue, we asked folks whether or not they were worried that higher taxes would be a concern if collective bargaining is implemented. And 73.9% of the folks said, yeah, they're worried about that.
Yeah. Well, I think everyone knows that there's no free lunch.
Right.
Some way or another, they've got to pay for this. And you can take one pot of money out of one pocket and stick it in another. That is not a net gain. And 75% of the people, you might as well say.
It's got to come from somewhere, right?
Yeah, they do.
And then I asked more specifically with respect to taxes whether or not they were aware that the Heritage Foundation did a study and estimated that the implementation of collective bargaining would cost the average family taxes in the range of $2,300 to $3,000 per year.
Right.
And 63.1% of the folks said they were unaware of that.
Yeah, well, that study was done, and that was done based on the fact that there was a lot of conversation in Virginia when they passed the legislation to make it optional for localities. And so, they started looking at those numbers, and they saw what this was going to cost if it was done on a statewide basis. And I think, it's pretty accurate.
It's a reasonable projection.
Yeah, it's reasonable, and it could be more, or it may be a little less. But still, it's, a lot of money to families out there just for a bargaining agent to be involved in state government negotiations.
And breaking down the cost just a little bit further, we asked the respondents whether or not they were aware that it would cost $12 million just to implement collective bargaining for statewide employees in Virginia.
Right. Yeah.
And 61.7% said they were unaware of that cost just to implement.
Yeah.
$12 million.
Well, I mean, you've got to have all the information and the people in place to do the bargaining, and
the board
that
all
has
the things
to be
that go along with
involved in that, and the structure that has to be in place to do collective bargaining, and that's not cheap.
Sure.
So $12 million of taxpayer money will be going into forming all this to make it happen.
They have to set up a whole process, a whole system to displace the General Assembly. because that's ultimately what's transpiring with collective bargaining.
And the unions are not going to lose money in that because they don't have anything in the bill that have any skin in the game for them, because
sure,
it's all 1% of what those negotiations are going to come back to them.
Mm-hmm. And again on cost, we asked the folks whether or not they were aware that the union dues would likely be 1% or more of their annual salary,
right?
Which is a lot more than what folks are paying now for dues,
right,
whether it be our association or some other. And 58.5% said that they were unaware the nature of
how those dues are paid
would be increasing.
And to give you an idea of what that's like and why unions really have pushed for this, in Virginia, according to the fiscal impact that was done, with the Capitol Police out and with legislative aids out, it was $96 million. Just 1% is $96 million
of salary, increase in salary.
Yeah. So
it's a whole bunch of money.
That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think once people start realizing there's a lot of money involved in this, and
mm-hmm.
and why Utah rejected it,
sure,
just recently, collective bargaining on a statewide. Why Norfolk City has said no to the collective bargaining.
In fact, since its implementation on the local level, there's only 7 jurisdictions that have adopted collective bargaining.
And that's over a 4-year period.
Right.
Because they know the cost of that. I know that when the localities started submitting numbers, Chesterfield was one of the largest on what it would cost them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was,
and they have been consistently through the fiscal impacts.
Through the whole team. It's like $100 million.
A realistic amount of money that it would cost them to implement,
right.
And that could be duplicated across the jurisdictions. And it's no wonder that jurisdictions haven't gone to collective bargaining. They haven't adopted it, except in those 7 jurisdictions. And we'll get to that in just a minute, because there's a super important detail regarding one of the questions. But let's jump to some of the effects of collective bargaining. So we asked the respondents whether or not that they believed that union contracts would reduce the efficiency and discipline effectiveness of law enforcement agencies if collective bargaining was implemented. And 74.6% of the folks said that they believed that it would.
Well, I don't think anyone now is not aware of what unionization does to a law enforcement agency. Mm-hmm. I think they've seen it in all kinds of aspects.
Certainly post 2020. We'll talk about that when we get to that episode.
So I think those numbers are really pretty good as far as how people feel about what it does to law enforcement.
Absolutely. We also asked whether or not that the folks that responded knew the scope of collective bargaining. And that being that it includes grievances, it includes wages, hours,
promotions,
and other terms of employment, which can include a whole host of things. Terms and conditions is what it's called. And that's big enough to drive a truck through, frankly. And so it's exceedingly broad, and 77.9% of the folks said that they knew that it included all those factors. Which is interesting, because that was the one question that tends to deviate from the nature of our responses on the poll.
That was the only question that I saw on the poll that had a significant deviation from what we had been seeing in the previous numbers.
Very good, very good. One of the other things that we talked about in terms of the scope of the collective bargaining proposal was grievances. And we also asked the folks on the poll whether or not they felt that it was appropriate for the union representative to be the sole exclusive representative for all employees, union and non-union alike, under collective bargaining. And they to a great majority, did not feel that that would be appropriate. 74.9% of the folks said that they didn't like that, and for a very good reason, because control of that grievance process is going to push people into unionization, because at the end of the day, they control the grievance process. If you want to grieve something, you have to go through the union.
Well, and there's a lot of people who just don't want to be a part of the union, just like there's some of the members of the state police that are not a part of the association or anything.
Sure.
And so I think they realize that with the fact that the union's going to control this whole thing, if they're not a part of it, then they're left out in the cold.
Exactly. And so certainly wasn't a very popular proposal in terms of the grievances. And, one other really interesting thing that came about is we asked about pay, because pay is always a big issue when it comes to collective bargaining. We hear a lot about it, right? But I asked the folks whether or not they thought that collective bargaining would bring about higher pay. And to the tune of 67.6% of the folks said they did not feel that that was going to be the case.
Well, and I think in the last 10 years or more, maybe, they've seen the work of the association and what we have done in reference to pay and compensation for all the things that they're involved in and the compression, and seeing the work that we've done, and they don't see where a union's going to do any more than what we currently have done as far as pay is concerned.
And we'll certainly revisit that in our subsequent episodes in terms of what our association has been able to do in the absence of collective bargaining.
We'll have statistics and numbers of what we've done over the past 10 years. Most of the troopers that have come on 10 years forward doesn't know a lot of the work that went into getting this starting pay up, fixing this compression issue, and the amount of money in the tune of $42 million or $48 million to fix the compression problem. So, I think with that data that we'll share later, you'll see that the association has been very successful, and these numbers prove that most people know that.
Absolutely. To dovetail on that, one other question that we asked dealt with the fact that there are some places in Virginia that actually already have collective bargaining.
Right.
Fairfax being one of them. There are in fact 7 jurisdictions in Virginia that have implemented it. It has to be implemented by county ordinance, and it's been available to all localities since 2021. But interestingly, only 7 localities have put it in place, and that mostly has to do with the localities understand the scope and cost of what collective bargaining is going to cost them. With Chesterfield being a very notable source of information related to what the true cost is.
Well, I think just looking at the numbers last year, they came in from Chesterfield over $100 million to implement this in their locality if they were forced to do it, which this bill would have forced localities. Goes to show the cost that this venture, if it makes it mandatory, because just for us it was $12 million to set it up in the state, and then 1% of all state employee raises is $96 million. So there's this huge cost to do this, and I think that has to be addressed when it comes to looking at whether that was all the cost to set it up and to do the 1%. Is that going to cost the individual money in the long run? Sure.
So what we asked was whether or not the respondents were aware that a trooper working in Fairfax with the differential pay makes more money than and this is for a Trooper 1 or Trooper 2, whether or not they're aware that a new Fairfax police officer starting base salary without any additions, because they do get some added pay for college education and foreign language and things of this nature, excluding those, that the new trooper 1 or trooper 2 in Fairfax makes more money than a Fairfax police officer. And that being very significant because Fairfax has had collective bargaining since 2021.
Right.
And if any locality was best equipped to pay for it, it's Fairfax.
Yeah, I think they're one of the most wealthiest counties, if not the most wealthiest county
across the country
in the United States.
Yeah.
And so if they're unable to do it, and I think when they showed the statistics on a 3 or 4% raise that they were able to negotiate, Fairfax County is running a budget deficit, which is about $300 million. And then with that budget deficit, they're not required by Constitution like Virginia is to balance their budget. So then you run into other issues in state government because they just don't do it because they don't have the money to cover the cost.
Yeah. Because
they're required by Constitution to balance the budget. You can't spend more than you're bringing in.
That's exactly right. And then interestingly enough, Fairfax, as of July of last year, they're down 200 officers.
Yeah, it doesn't affect their recruitment. And I'll say this, we talked about the Northern Virginia trooper making more than the Fairfax County police officer. Well, our pay incentive for Northern Virginia doesn't just affect Fairfax. It comes all the way down into Stafford. So,
certainly,
you have a lot of troopers that don't even patrol Fairfax that makes more money. And with the way the state police has allowed the travel time to your area, they can live in other locations that don't. The cost of living is not as much. So, I think that within itself shows that this collective bargaining negotiation doesn't affect, and why the numbers that you see here doesn't affect the fact that you can make more money if you're a part of a union.
And then one of the most interesting questions in terms of the unanimous result dealt with whether or not the respondents felt that or believed that collective bargaining would improve both recruiting and retention. And to the tune of 80.5%, folks said that they did not believe that would improve either of those things.
Well, we have an intelligent workforce that watches the way social environment is. They understand that there's more to this than just money. The social environment and the politics of everything has driven people away from being a law enforcement officer. I got a message from, I think it was someone who sent me the message from New York that they're losing 1,412 police officers in New York City. Mm-hmm. And they're in a crisis recruitment.
That's to resignations and retirements.
Yeah, resignation and retirements. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they're in a recruitment crisis, and they're sending it out all across the United States, asking for people to apply. Yeah. And so we're still down maybe 300. Fairfax, even with collective bargaining, is down 200. Yeah. So it isn't like it's just us that's feeling this. Yeah. It's
a systemic problem beyond what collective bargaining would purport to do.
But one important thing is it's more in union states than it is non-union states.
That's exactly right.
In the southern states that are non-union, they don't have as much of a workforce shortage as the union states have.
Right. That's exactly right.
So it basically shows you that this push to collective bargaining, creating unions, is not the answer to that problem. Mm-hmm.
Yes, indeed. And then one last question that we had of note for our video here today was we asked those folks that responded that indicated that they were supervisors whether or not they were aware that under the past proposal in the General Assembly that they would not be able to collectively bargain. Now, the bill did state that the government may engage in collective bargaining, but not shall. There's a big difference between may and shall. And 59.7% of those folks said that they were unaware of that.
Yeah, I think that's a big number and a big identifier for those that are within the agency and our membership that are supervisors, sergeants and above. That, even if you create your own collective bargaining unit, the state doesn't have to recognize it. There's no requirement in this law that says
they don't even have to engage them.
Yeah, they don't even have to talk to you.
Yeah, they can create it all day long, but there's no collective bargaining going on.
And then, if this bill were to pass and were to be signed into law, and they wouldn't engage you, or you didn't like the way the union was representing you, you cannot go to your legislator anymore, because your legislator will have to refer you to the
Back
board.
to your union boss.
Yeah, the union boss that has to work this out with that 5-member board. Mm-hmm. And so, you just basically take away your ability to talk with legislators about the problem that are going on.
Yes.
And they're not elected. They're appointed, and that board is appointed by members of the AFL-CIO that makes a lot of the decisions, what goes on in this. This
we'll
process.
talk about the proposed composition of the board, how that works, what the mechanics would look like, when we proceed through our series here.
I don't want to jump ahead, but
but I know that it's engaging conversation.
You're taking away your ability of an elected official to go to them to have a grievance of what's going on within state government, and they can't do anything about it.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have for you for this episode. And if you're watching online, please comment. We want to know what you have to say. We want to know your opinion, and we look forward to seeing you again when we finish up. We'll be talking about, again, the mechanics of the two bills, what's included, and then we'll also do an episode where we talk about the pros and cons. What is public sector collective bargaining?
Right, and we appreciate you answering the survey, because with the responses that we got, gives us a real good understanding of what the mass believes, and it helps me as I'm talking to legislators and sharing with them what our surveys revealed, and trying to get them to understand the uniqueness of what the state police is tasked to do when we're policing the police, and trying to do the things that were set forth by code, and that we're their police agency. So this survey really helps us when we were talking to legislators about our position.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.